Clapperboard, if you're a fan of epic sci-fi, mysterious alien worlds, and stories where humanity proves why we're not to be underestimated, then you're in for something special. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment letting us know your favorite moment in today's story. Now sit back and enjoy this original HFY tale. Alien priests worshipped the apex predator, until it bowed to the human pilgrim. The spires of Verexin 9 knifed through the turquoise mist like obsidian fangs, their jagged tips carved by millennia of wind and sacred fire. The jungle that blanketed the world below pulsed with bioluminescent life, but high above it, on the black-stoned cliffs, the world grew still. Nothing dared breathe near the ancient spire cathedral. At the heart of this fortress temple stood the Vorktrell, the great sanctum of the Apex One. It was more than a chamber, it was a throne carved into the bones of a mountain, a cradle of storms and silence where the Vorktrell slept. To the Dranithi, the reptilian inhabitants of this world, it was not merely a creature. It was divinity in flesh. High Priest Keldrash's cloak shimmered with golden scales as he strode through the central nave, flanked by lesser acolytes who kept their gazes respectfully lowered. Murals of claw and fire painted the walls, depictions of the Vorktrell's ancient wrath. In every image, it stood triumphant over burning jungles, shattered temples, and bleeding stars. Keldrash halted before the altar, raising both arms high. The crowd knelt in waves, thousands strong, their voices hissing in reverent unison. The flame that devours, he intoned, slumbers no longer. It stirs. The stars turn and the time of prophecy comes. One shall rise, not by steel nor by strength, but by the burn of the true flame. A soft murmuring rippled through the chamber. Pilgrims from 9 systems, ambassadors, psychics, battle kings, all had gathered for a chance to be chosen. For to be spared by the Vorktrell in its awakened form was to be crowned a voice of the divine. To be acknowledged by it was immortality. Keldrash's tongue flicked against his teeth. We prepare the trial of flame. The Vorktrell will decide who is worthy. Those who are not, his gaze swept over the sea of bowed heads, will not be mourned. Deep within the mountain the beast stirred. Its breath was the groan of tectonic pressure, its thoughts drifting in ancient tongues. It had begun to feel something, an unfamiliar mind approaching. Not with weapons. Not with fear. With silence. The pilgrim arrived at dawn, cloaked in dust and time. He walked without entourage. No translators, no weapons, no biometric insignia. Just a weathered pack slung over one shoulder and a staff that had clearly crossed 100 worlds. His boots bore the cracks of old roads, his eyes the weight of too many memories. No one knew his name. Some assumed he was a monk from a forgotten earth sect. Others thought him mad. A few priests suggested throwing him back into the jungle. He said nothing. At the outer gate, a Dranithi guard raised a pulse spear. Declare your house, your lineage, and your offering. The human only looked up. I have none of those. You seek audience with the Vorktrell without tribute? I seek nothing, he replied. Only rest. The guard stepped forward, his tail twitching. You mock our gods? The pilgrim's voice was calm. I only walk. Inside, the acolytes watched with suspicion as he moved through the sacred walkways. Some spat at his feet. Others whispered, hoping the Vorktrell would devour him for his disrespect. But he did not respond. He found a quiet corner near the spire and sat, cross-legged, facing the entrance to the beast's sanctum. Days passed. He did not eat. He did not speak. At night, when the others retreated to their quarters, he remained, watching, waiting, breathing. One evening, a young Dranithi priest approached him. Her voice was low but sharp. Do you think silence is enough? That the Vorktrell will rise for you because you pretend to suffer? He looked up. No. I think it will rise because it's already listening. She hissed, then stormed away. That night, the Vorktrell's eye opened in the dark. In the black pit beneath the spire, it felt the tremor of the human soul, not loud like the others, not filled with ambition or rage. Just steady. But unbroken. Remembered that rhythm. Long ago, during the fall of the Theta Cradle, it had faced a being with a similar presence. A human commander who walked alone into its path to rescue a child. The Vorktrell had spared him. It had never understood why. Until now. Above, in the council tower, Keldrash brooded. The Vorktrell has not responded to any of the warriors we've fed it. No visions. No flame. But it still stirs. The human, perhaps, murmured one of the priests. Keldrash sneered. That husk. That skin bag? A beast like Vorktrell would never bend for a species that fears its own reflection. But High One, the prophecy. Misinterpreted. Keldrash snapped. The firewalker with skin of ash and sun must be metaphor. Perhaps a solar-born Dranathi. Or a phoenix-blooded heir. Not that thing. Still the murmurs grew. Even some of the outer worlds began transmitting tales of the silent pilgrim. The human who watched the spire. The Voraktel, once dormant for cycles, had begun to shift every night. In the silence of the chamber, the human sat alone, and the air grew warmer. On the 5th day, a line of contenders began to form at the mouth of the sanctum. The trial was to begin. Keldrash stood upon the platform, casting his gaze down at the crowd. You who seek glory, step forward. Offer yourselves to the Voraktel and be judged. One by one, warriors clad in reactive armor, mystics shrouded in psionic barriers, and beasts enhanced by biotic tech entered the chamber. One by one they screamed, bled or fled. None were accepted. None returned with the beast's acknowledgement. Finally, as the sun dipped behind the spires, the final name was called. The human rose. The silence was suffocating. The priest did not cheer. The crowd did not chant. They simply watched. He walked past them like smoke through a battlefield. Not triumphant. Not afraid. Only present. As he reached the sanctum's threshold, a deep voice echoed, not from speakers but from every stone around him. Keldrash's voice, amplified by ritual. You human, enter now. But understand, none have survived without proving their worth. The Voraktel cannot be tricked. And it will not suffer cowards. The pilgrim paused only once, just before stepping into the void of the beast's chamber. He looked back, his eyes catching the firelight in a way that made some in the crowd shiver. I have nothing to prove, he said. Only something to remember. Then he vanished into the dark. And the spire shuddered with the sound of something ancient rising from sleep. Inside the sanctum the air was heavier than stone. It clung to skin, settled in the lungs, and hummed with a pressure that whispered not to breathe too deeply. The vast chamber was lit only by the faint glow of geothermal veins that traced the black walls like molten scars. No architecture guided the space, only natural formation shaped by heat, time, and the Voraktel's will. The human stepped forward. His boots crunched softly on the obsidian floor. His posture remained relaxed, almost meditative, his breathing measured. He scanned nothing, reached for no weapon. His hands hung at his sides like they had long ago learned violence had its place, and this was not it. Across the void, the Voraktel rose. It moved like a mountain uncoiling. Limbs thicker than trees. Armor that shimmered with veins of starlight. Its eyes opened like suns in eclipse, twin voids ringed by fire. Muscles shifted beneath layered plating as it stretched from its resting place, the sound echoing like distant thunder trapped in a canyon. Most who saw the Voraktel wept or screamed. Some went mad. It was a creature of primal terror, born in the black folds between stars, older than Virexen's jungles, beyond the taxonomy of simple predator. The human did not react. The beast stalked closer, claws ticking against the floor. Each step vibrated the ground. It lowered its head slowly, curious. Intrigued. Not because of challenge but because of calm. The human bowed, not low, not dramatic. Just enough to acknowledge presence. Then he sat. Legs crossed. Hands resting on his knees. The Voraktel's neck twitched in what might have been surprise. No shield. No plea. No psychic flare or aura of control. Just presence. The silence between them stretched. Not empty but full, like two old soldiers at a campfire with no need for words. The Voraktel's thoughts coiled through the space, brushing against the human surface mind. And there it felt the burn. Pain. Not fear. Not submission. But deep, seared pain forged into steel. There were memories, half-hidden, of battles not spoken of, not honored. Glass cities. Orbiting wreckage. Screams of comrades drowned in silence. The human's mind didn't wall off the pain. It carried it like stone in a pack, every step shaped by its weight. You are burned, the Voraktel's thoughts whispered. The human opened his eyes, barely nodding. The Voraktel leaned closer, and the chamber filled with its breath, a wave of heat and ozone. The creature's mind brushed deeper. It saw the scar running through the human's life. A planetary siege on a colony world, a last stand in a collapsed bunker, 13 survivors, 3 weeks underground. He had not broken. He had walked out. Not triumphant. Just breathing. You should not be whole. I'm not, the man whispered. Outside, in the observation chamber carved into the upper wall, Keldrash watched through the psionic viewing glass. He gripped the stone railing, claws digging into the rock. A dozen priests stood behind him in stunned silence. They had seen the Vorktel reject kings, warriors, prophets. Yet now it sat before this frail figure as if listening. "What is it doing?" one priest whispered. "It's waiting," another replied. "Listening to him." "Impossible," Keldrash hissed. "It listens to no one. It devours. It judges. This is a trick." One of the senior priests, older than most of the order, turned toward him. "Then why hasn't it struck?" Keldrash's gaze narrowed. He stepped away from the viewing chamber, retreating into the shadows beyond the wall. His voice was cold. "Even beasts can be deceived." Within the sanctum, the Vorktel circled slowly. It wasn't prowling. It was studying. Testing the shape of the human's presence. No ego. No need to dominate. No scent of conquest. Just this deep, anchored stillness. As if the man's soul had once caught fire and decided to sit in the flames. "Why do you not kneel like the others?" The human looked up, weary but unafraid. "I've kneeled before. To bury my dead. That was enough." The beast paused. "You seek no title. No. No glory. No. Then why are you here?" A long silence followed. The human closed his eyes again as if the answer had roots and needed to be dug up. "I lost something a long time ago," he said. "I thought if I kept walking maybe I'd find what's left of it. And this place." His fingers curled slightly. "It feels like a wound that never closed." The Vorktel did not move for a long time. Then it stepped back. Once. Twice. And lowered its head. The chamber trembled. In the observation chamber, several priests gasped. A few fell to their knees. One let out a sharp, terrified laugh. Keldrash stood frozen in the corridor, eyes wide, mouth open. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no, this cannot be." The Vorktel had never bowed. Not in 3,000 years of recorded history. Not during the founding of the Dranathi Order. Not during the burning crusade of the Sky Lords or the cleansing of the Swarm. It had slain empires, swallowed tyrants, ignored gods. Now, before a lone, weaponless human, it had bent its massive, armored head and breathed a low, rumbling exhale that felt suspiciously like relief. The human did not smile. He simply placed one hand on the stone floor in front of him. Not a claim. Just a gesture. "I see you," he said. The Vorktel's eyes closed. And for the first time in memory, the sanctum grew peaceful. A voice rang out from the upper spires. "Stop this." Keldrash emerged from the shadows, his ceremonial blade drawn, flanked by two elite guards. Their armor gleamed with plasma light, and their blades hissed with activated edge fields. "He has corrupted the trial," Keldrash shouted. "This is not reverence, it is witchcraft." The priests behind him hesitated, torn between loyalty and awe. But the Vorktel's massive frame turned sharply. Its eyes opened once more and its gaze fell upon the high priest. The guards froze mid-step. Their weapons shorted out with a metallic snap. One dropped his sword. The other fell to his knees, clutching his head in sudden agony. The psionic pressure in the air tightened like a vice. The Vorktel stepped forward once, sending a crack through the floor. Keldrash hesitated, then staggered back. His arrogance faltered. His voice shrank. He cannot be chosen. He is not of our blood. He is not even scaled." The beast bared its fangs. The human rose slowly, dusted his robe and stepped between them. "No more," he said. And the Vorktel stopped. For the second time that day, it obeyed. The silence that followed was not of fear, but of revelation. The priests bowed their heads not to the beast but to the man. Not in worship. Not in submission. But in understanding. Something had shifted. The old religion, centered on dominance and conquest, was cracking. Outside, the jungle wind began to howl. A storm gathered on the horizon, distant thunder rumbling like the roar of a great tide finally turning. The human turned toward the chamber's exit. "Where are you going?" one priest called out. The man paused at the threshold. "There's always another fire ahead. I just needed to rest here a while." "Who are you?" He didn't look back. Just someone who didn't burn away. Then he stepped into the light, leaving the spire behind. And the Vorktel watched him go, not as a god observing prey, but as a soldier watching another walk off the battlefield. The wind howled across the upper terraces of the spire cathedral, carrying with it the smoke of burning incense and the low, rattling chants of the outer priests. Yet beneath the surface, in the vaulted chambers where flame met stone and ancient glyphs pulsed with heat, something older than prayer had begun to stir. Not the Vorktel, it had returned to its slumber, but the council. They had convened in the Hall of Echoes, where no voice was permitted to rise above a whisper and every word was recorded by the living stone. There, beneath flickering green light and thick coils of vine smoke, High Priest Keldrash stood before the circle of mantles, 12 elders who had ruled the Dranathi religious caste for more than 6 generations. Their faces were hidden behind ceremonial bone masks, their expressions unreadable. "He deceives the beast," Keldrash said, his voice clipped and trembling with suppressed rage. "The Voraktel was corrupted by some human artifice, a manipulation of psionic pathways or a cloaked minefield. We cannot allow this to redefine the trial." No one replied. "I warned you when we allowed off-world pilgrims to stand before the flame. I warned you what their kind might bring." One of the mantles leaned forward. "And yet you permitted it." The creature bowed, another whispered. "Not to royalty. Not to strength. To a quiet man who asked for nothing. The implications are troubling." Keldrash's claws curled against the stone floor. "They are dangerous. That human has dismantled our doctrine with a bow. If word spreads, and it will, every belief we've cultivated for centuries may fracture." "We do not fear questions, High One," the third mantle said quietly. Keldrash's eyes narrowed. "Then you are fools." Silence fell like a dropped blade. The mantles did not move, but the temperature in the chamber dropped perceptibly. Even the stone beneath their feet seemed to stiffen, as though the ancient walls themselves recoiled from his words. "The Voraktel has spoken," said the eldest mantle. "It does not bow by mistake." Keldrash stared at them, his throat working. Then, with a final hiss of breath, he turned and left. Outside, the world was already changing. Pilgrims who once came seeking divine favor now sat in quiet circles, discussing the human. They called him the Firewalker. The one without flame. The Flame Bearer. Stories were already mutating. Some claimed he had tamed the Voraktel with a single glance. Others whispered that he carried the memory of an entire dead planet in his soul. The truth was quieter, but it spread just as quickly. Elias Calder walked the edge of the outer rim, near the boundary where jungle met stone. He no longer wore his cloak. His robes, torn and soot-streaked, flapped loosely in the breeze. He moved slowly, not out of weakness but because each step felt deliberate. He had thought, perhaps, that leaving the spire would loosen something inside him. That the weight he carried might lessen now that the great beast had bowed. But the ache was still there. Old wounds didn't vanish with ceremony. He crouched near a low pool that reflected the burning orange sky and dipped a hand into the cool water. Steam hissed where his fingers met the surface. He pulled them out again and stared at the faint scorch mark along his wrist. A memento from his last off-world tour, where plasma heat had melted through 4 layers of armor. "You're not what I expected," said a voice behind him. He didn't turn. The speaker was Dranathi, a young one by the tone. Female, lightly armored, no weapons drawn. She approached with slow, respectful steps. "I saw you," she said. "In the chamber." Elias said nothing. "I'm Liran," she continued. "A scholar priest. Or was. Before yesterday, I thought I understood everything about the flame and what it meant to be chosen." He glanced over his shoulder. "And now?" She hesitated. "Now I think we wrote stories about power so we could avoid admitting what we feared." Elias looked back at the water. "That's what stories are for." She walked closer and sat on a low rock across from him. Her scales caught the sunlight and shifted color slightly, like oil on water. Her eyes were wide but cautious. "You're not a warrior," she said. "I've been one. But not anymore." "No. Then what are you?" He thought about that for a long moment. The breeze rustled the trees behind them. "Tired," he said at last. She watched him, trying to measure the weight of that word. "The Voraktel saw something in you. Something no one else has ever carried." Elias didn't reply. He didn't need to. The way his shoulders remained slightly hunched, the faint flicker of tremors in his fingers, these were the aftershocks of battles long since finished but never truly left behind. Liran leaned forward. "They're not going to let you leave. The High Priest sees your presence as a threat. There are already whispers of," she trailed off, lowering her voice, "assassins. Discrediting. Or worse." He looked up. "Then they haven't learned a damn thing. They're afraid. They should be." That quiet warning hung in the air between them. Elias's eyes were calm, but they carried something deeper, a kind of scar that hadn't faded, only buried. He didn't threaten like a predator. He simply existed in a space where threats were unnecessary. Liran stood. "There are others like me. Priests. Acolytes. People who believe what happened wasn't blasphemy, but revelation. We want to understand. Help others understand. I'm not here to lead a movement. We don't want a leader. We want the truth." He raised an eyebrow. "Truth's dangerous." so is ignorance. They studied each other for a long moment. Finally, Elias stood, brushing ash from his robe. Tell your people to be careful, he said. Keldrash isn't going to back down. He's too invested in the myth. And the myth just lost its crown. I'll try. He nodded once, then turned toward the jungle path. Lyran started to speak again but hesitated. He was already gone, swallowed by vines and mist. Back at the spire, in the chambers hidden beneath the council halls, Keldrash prepared for war. He stood before a steel vault door, his personal sigil glowing on the palm reader. With a hiss of escaping gas, the door opened to reveal an armory older than the current civilization. Inside were weapons crafted for one purpose: to kill gods. He selected a spear made of void alloy, rumored to have been forged from the remains of a fallen star beast. He tested its weight, eyes burning with conviction. There was no room for heresy. No room for erosion. The foundation of their power had lasted centuries because it had been unquestioned. Now one man, quiet, unarmed, and human, had fractured that silence with nothing but presence. He would correct the error. As night fell, the sky over Virexen 9 blazed with twin moons. Fires flickered in the lower jungles as torchlight dances began. Celebrations, offerings, and whispered prayers, all laced with confusion and awe. The Voraktel did not stir. But it watched. It watched from the depths of its volcanic chamber, unblinking, listening to the shifting current of thought that now swept through the species it had once judged only by instinct. Something was changing. For the first time, it did not know whether it would be feared or understood. In a small hollow miles from the spire, Elias sat beneath a dying tree, watching the stars wheel overhead. He leaned against the bark, staff resting across his knees, and exhaled slowly. Every breath came with effort but not struggle. Just the kind of labor that came after a long road. The jungle whispered around him, and somewhere far in the dark, a new fire had been lit. The jungle trembled long before the first explosion echoed through the mist. Elias awoke not with a jolt, but with a breath that caught in his chest like old instinct being dragged out of retirement. The flames had not yet reached his hollow, but the air had changed. The wind no longer sang. It pressed instead, heavy with heat and silence. A silence born not from peace, but the moment before violence breaks open. He rose and gathered what little he had. The staff, the pack, his resolve. He didn't run. That would have been beneath the nature of what was coming. Instead, he walked calmly toward the sound of danger, toward the flicker of red light crawling across the canopy like fire licking its lips. By the time he emerged from the tree line, the outer terraces of the Spire Cathedral were already ablaze. Dranathi guards lay in tangled heaps across the black stone bridges. Ritual pillars had cracked from impact. Something had detonated beneath the entry causeway, and now the sacred ground was open to the sky. The old laws of protection had been broken with steel and fire. Lyran met him at the lower steps, her robes torn, scales scorched. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, relief etched into every corner of her face. "You shouldn't have come back," she said between breaths. "You knew I would. There are soldiers in the sanctum. Not just guards, mercenaries, offworlders. Cloaked in Dranathi armor but trained to kill without hesitation." He looked past her toward the temple mouth. "Keldrash?" He led them in. Said it was a purification. Said the beast had been tainted. He means to force it to bow again, this time to him. Or kill it. Elias's mouth tightened. "Then he's more desperate than I thought." She grabbed his wrist. "You don't have to do this. We can escape. There are others still hiding, priests who believe. We can regroup, reveal the truth. Time will turn the tide." "No," Elias said, voice low and steady. "Time doesn't fix a burning house. You put out the fire." He turned from her and walked toward the ruined entryway. No one stopped him. No soldier saw him. The storm above was building fast, clouds churning with purple electricity and the strange humming sound that only came before a planet decided it had endured enough. Inside, the sanctum was unrecognizable. The carved walls were scorched and cracked. The sigils of flame were defaced. Rubble littered the floor, and scorched blood painted crude symbols where reverence had once lived. At the far end of the vast chamber, Keldrash stood with his elite guard and 2 off-world enforcers, their weapons trained not on intruders but on the Voraktel. The beast was wounded. A long, searing gash cut across its flank, leaking radiant fluid that hissed on the stone. One of its horns had shattered, the jagged stump blackened with explosive residue. It was cornered now not by force, but by betrayal. And yet it did not strike. It stared. Eyes locked on the man approaching with calm, deliberate steps. Keldrash turned, fury and disbelief warring behind his painted eyes. You. Elias kept walking. I told you before. You didn't understand what you were dealing with. You poisoned it. You turned it into a symbol of weakness. Elias stopped 10 paces away. It bowed because it recognized something in me. Something you've spent your life avoiding. It saw pain that didn't ask to be glorified. It saw someone who walked through fire without needing to own it. The high priest's lip curled. You think that makes you worthy of worship? No, Elias said. That's what makes me human. Keldrash's blade ignited in a plume of blue light. You will not undo centuries of devotion with your pity. He raised the weapon. But Elias didn't flinch. The Vorktel did. With a sudden seismic roar, it surged forward, not at Elias but between him and the incoming blow. Its massive body swept across the chamber like a living avalanche, its tail cracking the floor and flinging the off-world guards against the far wall. Keldrash was thrown back, his blade clattering across the stone. The chamber plunged into chaos. Elias moved with purpose, reaching the creature's side. He placed a steady hand against the wounded flank. The flesh was hot, pulsing with pain but not rage. The Vorktel's breath hitched. Not fear, recognition. I'm here, Elias whispered. Keldrash rose, blood streaking his temple. His fury was no longer righteous, it was desperate, panicked. It is mine. I am its voice. He lifted a second weapon, a relic forbidden in Dranathi culture. A compression lance, powered by dark energy drawn from black hole remnants. A single blast could pierce a moon's core. Elias saw it. He didn't hesitate. He stepped between the priest and the Vorktel. The lance fired. A flash of violet carved through the air, silent and absolute. Time slowed. The blast struck Elias squarely in the chest. But it did not pierce. A shockwave burst outward, not of destruction, but of memory. A ripple of raw experience poured from the human's body like light escaping a collapsing star. His pain, his long-buried ache, unfolded in silent pulses across the chamber. The weight of loss. The heat of war. The silent suffering of survivors. And the Vorktel roared, not in anger but in answer. It surged forward, jaws wide, and in a single thunderous movement swallowed Keldrash whole. Silence returned. Elias dropped to his knees. The energy blast had not killed him. But it had taken everything else. He was shaking. Not from fear. From release. Lyran entered moments later, gasping at the carnage. When she reached him, she tried to help him stand. He waved her off gently, his breathing ragged. It's done, he said. He's gone. The Vorktel stood above them, chest heaving, body torn but eyes soft. It lowered its head once more. Not in submission. In gratitude. Elias reached out and placed a hand against the creature's brow. No words were needed. The connection between them was complete now. No prophecy, no ritual, just shared truth. You're free, Elias whispered. So am I. The storm outside broke open, rain slashing against the scorched spires, lightning crackling through the sky. But inside the sanctum the heat began to fade. The old sigils reignited, glowing with a gentler flame. Not fire that burned, but fire that warmed. Lyran turned to him. What will you do now? Elias looked toward the sky, where light pierced the clouds like new dawn. What I've always done. Walk. People will want answers. They'll want to follow you. They shouldn't. They should follow themselves. She smiled faintly. That sounds like something a leader would say. He gave a dry chuckle. Let's hope they don't mistake it for prophecy. The Vorktel let out a low rumble and stepped back into the shadows of its chamber, its great form disappearing into the stone as though it had never been there at all. For the first time the sanctum felt empty not because of absence, but because of peace. Elias looked at the spot where it vanished. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, the firelight casting his long shadow across the sacred floor. Outside, the wind carried whispers to the jungle, to the far peaks, to the stars themselves. A new legend had begun, not of conquest but of endurance. Not of might but of meaning. And so, the apex predator bowed to the human not because he was stronger, but because he had already survived everything the universe feared.